They said Elliot Ashbourne, the Duke of Ravenswood, had a heart like the marble floors of his estate, cold, immaculate, and utterly indifferent to the warmth of human feet. His mother had wept. His aunt had pleaded. 3 seasons' worth of London's most accomplished young women had smiled their most practiced smiles across the most elegant tables in England, and he had looked through every single one of them as though they were windows with nothing worth seeing on the other side. "I shall never marry," he had told his mother at Christmas, with the same quiet finality a man uses when closing a ledger. She had not believed him. She should have. That was 6 months ago. What happened between that December evening and the morning his valet found him standing at the garden window at 6:30, smiling for no apparent reason, but at absolutely nothing, is the kind of story that London society would have paid considerable sums to understand. They constructed their own versions, naturally. They always do. The accounts were colourful, contradictory, and almost entirely wrong. Because the truth did not begin at any ball or dinner party or fashionable promenade. It began in a rain-soaked courtyard on the outskirts of Bath, at precisely the wrong moment, with a woman who was not supposed to be there at all. Miss Clara Ashton arrived in Bath on the 14th of April with one small trunk, a borrowed letter of introduction, and a secret that would have ended her entirely if a single person in that city had known it. She was 24, the youngest daughter of a country vicar of modest means and immodest bookshelves, and she carried herself with the particular composure of someone who has long since learned that composure is the only armor the poor are permitted to wear in polite company. She was not the most beautiful woman in any room she entered. She'd been told this often enough that she had stopped expecting it to wound her. What she had instead was something considerably more dangerous. The kind of face that rewarded attention. The kind of eyes that made people feel afterwards that she had understood something about them they had not meant to reveal. She had not come to Bath to find a husband. She would have laughed at the suggestion, quietly and with genuine feeling. She had come because she had no other choice, and because the letter in her coat pocket, the one she had not yet decided whether to deliver, had a name on it that changed everything. The Duke of Ravenswood's name. The rain had not let up for 3 days. Bath in April had a way of making even the grandest ambitions feel waterlogged, and Clara Ashton stood at the narrow window of her borrowed lodgings on Brock Street, watching the courtyard below fill with grey water, and told herself for the 4th time that morning that she did not have to deliver the letter. She could fold it back into her coat pocket. She could fold herself back onto the northbound coach. She could return to Wiltshire and the vicarage and the small, manageable life that asked nothing of her beyond Sunday dinners and the mending of her father's sermon notes. She could do all of that. She did not do any of it. Now the letter had come to her 3 weeks ago through a chain of hands she did not entirely trust. Her father's old friend, a solicitor named Mr. Croft, had pressed it into her palm at the door of the vicarage with an expression that was half apology and half urgency. "It concerns your brother," he had said. That was all he had said. Because that was all he needed to say. Thomas Ashton was 22 years old, reckless in the specific way that younger sons of impoverished families are reckless, and 6 months ago he had done something that Clara had not yet found the edges of. She knew the shape of it, a debt, a game of cards, a sum that bore the Duke of Ravenswood's name somewhere in its accounting, but not the full dimensions. What she knew was that Thomas had vanished from his lodgings in London in November and had not written since, and that the letter in her pocket was addressed in her brother's handwriting and sealed with a crest she did not recognize, and that it was meant for the Duke, and that Mr. Croft had told her, with the careful understatement of a man delivering catastrophic news politely, that if the Duke did not receive it, Thomas's situation would become irrecoverable. She had not opened the letter. She had considered it. She had held it up to a candle 3 separate times. But she had not broken the seal, because she was her father's daughter, and her father had taught her that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed, and because some part of her was afraid of what she would find on the other side of it. She pulled on her coat, put the letter in her pocket, and went out into the rain. She found the Duke of Ravenswood not at his estate, and not at the assembly rooms, not at any of the addresses Mr. Croft had provided. She found him in the courtyard of the White Hart Inn, standing in the rain without a hat, watching a horse being badly managed by a very young groom with the focused attention of a man who is deciding whether to intervene. He had not yet intervened. He was, Clara would later understand, a man who waited until the last possible moment before deciding on everything and in every area of his life. It was not patience, it was precision. He was taller than she had expected, darker, somehow, than the descriptions she had assembled second-hand. He wore his consequence without decoration, the way mountains wear their height, simply by being present and letting you arrive at the conclusion yourself. He had not looked at her yet. She was standing 6 feet away in the rain with a letter in her coat pocket addressed to him, and he was watching the horse, and she was watching him, and she was thinking, clearly and unhelpfully, that this had been a catastrophic mistake. Then the horse reared, the groom stumbled, and without planning it in the least, Clara stepped forward and caught the bridle. The horse came down, the groom scrambled upright, and the Duke of Ravenswood turned and looked at her for the first time. What he saw, what he would remember, though he would not admit to remembering it with any particular clarity for some time, was a woman in a wet coat with her hair beginning to come unpinned, one hand still on the bridle of his horse, looking at him with an expression that was not triumph, not relief, and not the performed helplessness that he had learned to expect from women in proximity to mild drama. It was simply assessment. She looked at him the way a person looks at a problem they are still deciding whether to take on. "Your groom holds the reins too high," she said. "It makes her anxious." A pause. Rain on the cobblestones. The horse breathing. "You ride," he said. "My father could not afford a carriage," she said. "I learned out of necessity, not accomplishment. There is a difference." She released the bridle, stepped back and looked at him with that same level steadiness. "Are you the Duke of Ravenswood?" He was not accustomed to being asked. Most people simply knew and arranged their faces accordingly. "I am," he said. She reached into her coat pocket and produced the letter. She held it out to him in the rain, and her hand was entirely steady. "Then this is for you," she said. "I was asked to deliver it. I have delivered it. Good day, Your Grace." She turned and walked away, and he stood in the courtyard of the White Hart Inn in the rain, holding an unopened letter, watching her go, and experiencing for the first time in recent memory the peculiar sensation of having been thoroughly dismissed. He did not call after her, but he looked at the letter in his hand for a long moment before he opened it, and what he read made him look up immediately, back toward the gate through which she had already disappeared. Because the letter was from Thomas Ashton, and Thomas Ashton, in 3 pages of increasingly desperate handwriting, it was explaining that his sister knew nothing about the full nature of what had happened, that she had been sent with the letter in good faith, told only that a debt required settling, and that whatever the Duke decided to do next, Clara Ashton was innocent of all of it. Whatever the Duke decided to do next. Elliot Ashbourne folded the letter. He stood in the rain, and he thought about the woman who had caught his horse, corrected his groom, and handed him the thing she'd been carrying without asking what was in it or what it would cost her. He went after her. He found her at the end of Queen Street walking fast, and he matched her pace before she had registered his approach. "Miss Ashton," he said. She stopped. She turned, and for just a moment before she reassembled her composure, so he saw something cross her face. Not fear exactly, but the cousin of it. The expression of a person who had been hoping they were already safe. "You know my name," she said. "I have just read your brother's letter." The composure held, but only just. "Then you know more than I do," she said very quietly. "He did not tell me what was in it." "No," the Duke said. "He did not." He studied her face. There was no performance in it. No calculated appeal. She was simply standing in the rain on Queen Street, waiting to be told how much damage had been done. "Come inside," he said. "There is a matter we need to discuss." She looked at him with those eyes, the kind that made people feel understood against their will, and said, "Are you asking me or telling me, Your Grace?" Despite himself, despite everything. He almost smiled. Asking," he said. She went inside. What the Duke told her in the private sitting room of the White Hart Inn, over tea that went cold while he talked, was this. Her brother had 6 months ago borrowed a substantial sum from a man named Harwick, a creditor of the worst sort, the kind who lends money as a trap rather than a kindness. The debt had been sold on twice, and had arrived eventually at an arrangement involving Ravenswood's name through a land dispute that Thomas had unwisely inserted himself into on behalf of a friend. Thomas had not cheated. He had not stolen. He had simply been young and foolish and out of his depth, and now he was somewhere in the north of England avoiding a legal summons. The only way the matter could be quietly resolved was if someone with sufficient standing and sufficient patience agreed to manage it. Clara listened to all of this without interruption. When he had finished, she set down her cup. "What does managing it require?" she asked. "Time," he said, "and presence in Bath for the next several weeks while certain arrangements are made through the proper channels." He paused. "Your presence, Miss Ashton, as a credible social witness to certain transactions." She looked at him. "You're asking me to stay in Bath." "I am asking you to stay in Bath." "And Thomas?" "Thomas will be home by June if you do." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had finally softened to something bearable. "You could manage this without me," she said. It was not a question. He considered denying it. He found he couldn't. "Probably," he admitted, "but not as cleanly." He met her eyes. "And I find, Miss Ashton, that I would rather do it cleanly." She looked at him for a long moment with that devastating steadiness. Then she said, "I will need to write to my father." He nodded. "And I will need an understanding," she said, "that whatever this arrangement is, it is an arrangement between equals. I am not a pawn to be moved about a board and thanked for not complaining." He felt something shift in him at that, something that had been very still for a very long time. "Understood," he said. She stayed. What followed, the 3 weeks that Bath society would later reconstruct incorrectly and with great enthusiasm, was not a courtship. It did not begin as one. It began as a series of practical meetings in the solicitor's office on Milsom Street, with Clara present as the Duke had requested, she listening carefully and asking questions that were inconveniently good. It continued as a series of less practical walks along the gravel walk, which had been the Duke's suggestion on the grounds that the solicitor's office had poor ventilation, and which Clara had agreed to with the serene expression of a woman who has decided not to examine the reasoning too closely. He learned things. Not the kind of things you learn about a woman you have been introduced to in a ballroom. Not her family's consequence or her accomplishments at the pianoforte. He learned that she read standing up when she was impatient, walking in small circles with the book held at arm's length because sitting down felt too much like waiting. He learned that she had an opinion about everything and voiced approximately a third of them, and that the 2/3 she kept to herself were generally the most interesting. He learned that she had been managing the vicarage account since she was 16 because her father was brilliant with theology and catastrophic with figures, and that she had never once complained about it, and that she did not consider it a sacrifice because she loved her father more than she resented the circumstance. He did not tell her any of this. He filed it in the same place he filed everything that mattered, quietly, carefully, in the part of himself that he did not show people. Clara, for her part, was not falling in love with the Duke of Ravenswood. She was absolutely certain of this. She told herself so on most mornings, with the brisk efficiency of a woman closing a ledger. He was proud, certainly. Not cruelly so, but in the way of a man who had never needed to ask for anything, and had therefore never learned the particular humility that asking teaches. He was accustomed to silence being interpreted as wisdom, and to rooms adjusting themselves around him rather than the other way about. He was, in short, exactly the kind of man she had always known would be entirely wrong for her. And yet, there was an evening in the third week when they were walking back from the solicitor's office, and a child on the corner was selling lavender in the rain. Very young, perhaps 7, with wet shoes and a basket going soft at the base, and the Duke had stopped, without any theatre about it, and bought the entire basket, and handed it back to the child, and kept walking without remark of any kind. He had not done it to be seen, and he did not even glance at Clara afterward to see if she had noticed. She noticed. She said nothing. But she thought about it that evening, and the evening after that, and she filed it in the same careful place where she kept the things that mattered. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, addressed to Clara at her lodgings on Brock Street, in a hand she did not recognize. It was unsigned. It was 3 sentences long, and it told her, plainly and without embellishment, that the Duke of Ravenswood had agreed to resolve her brother's situation not because of any legal arrangement, not because of any transaction requiring a social witness, but because he had examined Thomas's circumstances and found them pitiable, and had decided to manage them quietly as a private act of charity. There was no arrangement. There had never been an arrangement. Clara Ashton's presence in Bath had been, from the very beginning, unnecessary. She read it twice. She sat very still at the writing table, and she did not move for a long moment. When the sounds of Brock Street came in through the window, the cart wheels, the vendor calls, the ordinary industry of a morning that did not know anything had just broken. And she let them come in because she needed something ordinary to hold on to, while the shape of 3 weeks rearranged itself inside her. She was not naive. She understood that the world managed women. She had been managed before. Gently, firmly, always for her own good, always by people who believed they were being kind. Her mother's physician, who had not explained her mother's illness because he felt the details would distress her. The solicitor who had read her father's will directly to her brother, as though she were a piece of furniture that happened to be present. She had learned to identify the particular flavor of being handled, the warmth that is not warmth but administration, the consideration that is not respect but management. She had believed this was different. She had sat across from him in solicitors' offices for 3 weeks and asked her questions and held her ground, and believed that the arrangement between them was honest, that when he said equals, he had meant it. She put on her coat and walked to the Duke's townhouse on the Royal Crescent, and asked for him at the door, and when he came into the entrance hall she held the letter out and said, in a voice that was very quiet and extremely precise, "Is this true?" He looked at the letter. He looked at her face. And he did not insult her by lying. "Yes," he said. The silence that followed was not brief, and it was not the kind of silence that resolves quickly into the next thing. It was the silence of a woman sitting very carefully with what she has just been handed, examining it from every angle, and finding nothing that softens it. "You kept me here," she said at last. "Yes." "You invented a reason." "I did." "You told me it was an arrangement between equals." Her voice had not risen. That was the thing about Clara Ashton's anger. It did not escalate. It simply became more precise. "You told me I was not a pawn to be moved about a board." "I know what I told you." "And then you moved me about a board," she said, "and thanked me for not complaining." He opened his mouth. He closed it. Because there was nothing to say to that which was not either a lie or a confirmation, and he had already confirmed it. So she looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked at the entrance hall, the polished floor, the arrangements on the side table, the whole comfortable architecture of a life that had never needed to account for hers. And something in her expression went very quiet and very final. "I came to Bath for Thomas," she said. "I stayed because I believed I was needed. I managed the solicitor's questions, and I sat in those offices for 3 weeks, and I believed that my presence had a purpose that was mine, not yours." She folded the letter. "You took that from me." You decided I would stay, and you constructed a reason, and you did not think it necessary to ask me whether I wished to be a character in your story." She looked at him directly. "That is not consideration, Your Grace. And that is exactly what I told you I would not tolerate." "Clara, do not," she said. Not loudly, but with the force of a woman who has made a decision about how much of herself she is willing to spend on this conversation. "I am leaving Bath on Friday. Thomas's situation is resolved. You have confirmed as much by not denying it. I am grateful for that, genuinely, and I will not pretend otherwise." She moved toward the door, "But I will not be grateful enough to forget what you did." She left. He stood in the entrance hall of the Royal Crescent townhouse until Jennings, his valet, appeared silently in the doorway of the side passage, with the expression of a man who has heard everything through walls and has decided that the appropriate response is invisibility. "That will be all, Jennings," the Duke said. "Yes, Your Grace." He sat in the study for the rest of the afternoon. He did not read. He did not write. He sat and he thought about what she had said, not the words he could defend himself against, but the ones he couldn't. "That is not consideration. That is exactly what I told you I would not tolerate." He had heard those words. He had agreed to them sincerely in that sitting room at the White Hart with the cold tea between them. And then he had spent 3 weeks conducting himself as though the agreement had not been made, because it was more convenient for him to have her in Bath than to be honest about why. The difficulty was that he had not known why. Not at first. He had told himself it was prudence, that her presence smoothed the social mechanics of the matter, that it was cleaner. And those things were partially true, mind which had made the lie comfortable to inhabit. It was only somewhere in the second week, walking back from Milsom Street in the early evening with her slightly ahead of him because she walked faster than he did and had never adjusted her pace for him, that he had understood with sudden, inconvenient clarity that the arrangement had nothing to do with solicitors or Thomas Ashton or anything clean or prudent at all. He had wanted more time in her company. That was the entire truth of it. And rather than say so, rather than stand in a rain-soaked courtyard and ask a woman he barely knew if she might consider staying in Bath a while longer, he had built a structure around the wanting and called it a reason. Because he was the Duke of Ravenswood, and dukes did not ask. Dukes arranged. He understood, and sitting in the study in the late afternoon light, that she had every right to leave, and that if she did, it would be the precise consequence of the precise thing she had named. He had not treated her as an equal. He had treated her as a variable he wished to keep in the equation, and had adjusted the equation accordingly, and had not thought to tell the variable what he was doing. He sat with that for a long time. It was not comfortable. He did not try to make it comfortable. On Thursday evening, he went to the writing desk and he wrote a letter. He discarded the first draft because it began with an explanation of his reasoning, and he understood that his reasoning was not what she needed from him. He discarded the second because it began with an apology, and an apology without change attached to it was just an explanation dressed differently. He wrote the third draft in a single sitting, without planning it, which was not how he did most things, but turned out to be how this had to be done. He folded it, sealed it, and gave it to his man with instructions to deliver it to Miss Ashton's lodgings on Brock Street that evening. He did not sleep well. She read the letter at her writing table by candlelight, already half packed, the trunk open behind her. He had not written much. 3 paragraphs. From the first acknowledged, without qualification or softening, exactly what he had done and why it was wrong. Not wrong as a matter of social conduct, but wrong in the specific way she had named it, which was that he had decided for her when he had agreed not to. The second paragraph did not ask her to stay. It made no appeal and extended no invitation. It simply said that she had been right, in the sitting room at the White Hart, to set the terms she had set, and that he had agreed to them and then violated them, and that he understood why she was leaving, and that she owed him nothing, not a response, not a conversation, not a moment of her time. The third paragraph was 4 sentences long, and it said that he had not known what he wanted when she arrived in Bath. and that he had known for approximately a fortnight, and that the thing he had wanted was to know her, and that he was aware it was too late to say so honestly without it sounding like a strategy, and that he was saying it anyway because she deserved to hear the true reason, even if it changed nothing. Clara set the letter down. She sat for a long time. Then she blew out the candle and went to bed. She was at the coaching inn the following morning, her trunk loaded, her gloves on, her ticket purchased. The North Road was grey and rutted after the week's rain, and the coach was already being brought round. She stood on the pavement and looked at it and told herself, with all the composure she possessed, that she was making the correct decision, and that correct decisions did not require feeling good. Her mother had taught her that. It was one of the better things she'd been taught. Now the letter was still in her coat pocket. She had put it there without thinking, which probably meant something, but she was not going to examine what. The coachman called for boarding. She picked up her bag. "Miss Ashton." She turned. The Duke of Ravenswood was standing at the entrance of the coaching inn, not on horseback, not with Jennings or any other servant. Alone, on foot, his coat slightly wrong, his hat in his hands. And she noticed this because she had noticed the first time, that rain-soaked courtyard, that he had been hatless then too, as though hats were the first thing to go when he was uncertain. He looked, she thought, like a man who had not slept. He did not cross toward her. He stayed where he was. And he said, across the ordinary noise of the inn yard, "I'm asking." She looked at him. Asking what? Precisely. For the chance to be different than I was. A pause. The coachman called again. He did not look away from her. Not for more time under false pretenses. Not for an arrangement. "I'm asking whether, if I were to come to Wiltshire in a month after Thomas's home and you have had the time you are owed, you might be willing to have a single honest conversation, with no structure built around it." He stopped. "I'm asking, Miss Ashton. Not arranging." The coachman called a final time. Clara looked at the coach. She looked at him. She thought about the child with the lavender. She thought about the letter, which she already knew she would read again on the road north. She thought about the particular quality of a man standing in a coaching inn yard without his hat, asking instead of arranging, which was perhaps the most significant thing he had done since she'd known him. "Come in 6 weeks," she said. "Not before, and you will explain yourself to my father first." Something in his face. Not a smile, not yet, but the thing that comes just before one. "I expect nothing less." She boarded the coach. He stood in the yard and watched it pull out through the gate, and then he stood there a while longer. Jennings, who had followed at a discreet distance because he was that kind of valet, appeared at his shoulder. "Shall I bring the horse round, Your Grace?" "No," the Duke said. "I'll walk." He walked back through Bath in the thin spring morning, past the White Hart, past the gravel walk, past the corner where the child had sold lavender in the rain, and where there was now nobody at all. And he walked all the way back to the Royal Crescent, and he stood in the entrance hall, and he felt, for the first time in a very long time, the particular quality of a space that is empty, and might not always be. He came to Wiltshire in 6 weeks exactly. Not a day before. The vicarage was small and warm and smelled of old books and wood smoke, and her father met him at the door in his shirt-sleeves with ink on his fingers, and looked at him with the attentive, unhurried gaze of a man accustomed to reading what people were not saying. They sat in the study for an hour. The Duke answered every question directly, including the ones that were inconvenient, and the Reverend Ashton listened to all of it, and then said, with the quiet certainty of a man who has had a long time to understand his daughter, "She will not be managed." He said it not as a warning, but as a plain statement of fact, the way you tell a man the ceiling is low before he walks through the door. "I have tried. Her mother tried. Life has tried. It has not taken." "I know," the Duke said. The Reverend looked at him carefully. "You know now," he said. "The question is whether you will remember it in 3 years." The Duke thought about the entrance hall at the Royal Crescent, about the question he had not asked and the structure he had built instead, about what it had cost. "I will remember it," he said. I intend to be reminded if I forget." The Reverend nodded once. Then he called for Clara. She came in from the garden with her gloves still on and soil on her cuffs, because she had been planting, and she looked at the Duke sitting in her father's study with the same level steadiness she had deployed in rain-soaked courtyards and coaching in yards, and he looked back at her, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "Walk with me," she said. They walked. And not far, just the length of the kitchen garden and back, in the late afternoon light of a Wiltshire June, while her father watched from the study window and pretended not to. The Duke did not have a prepared speech. He had thought about preparing one and had decided against it because she would know the difference between a prepared speech and an honest one, and honest was the only currency that had ever worked between them. He told her he had thought about her every day for 6 weeks. He told her that was not an appeal for sympathy, but a fact he thought she was owed. He told her that he had not known before Bath that the particular feeling of a room after a person has left it could be that pronounced, and that he had now had 6 weeks of rooms and had found the experiment thoroughly instructive. He told her he wanted, and more than anything, to know what the 2/3 of her opinions were, the ones she kept to herself, the ones he suspected were the most interesting. He told her he did not expect her trust. He told her he intended to earn it slowly, by asking instead of arranging, and that he was aware asking did not come naturally to him, and that he was asking her to be patient with the learning of it. She listened to all of it walking beside him along the garden path. When he had finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You read the last page first," she said. He stopped. "I beg your pardon? You told me the conclusion before the middle." There was something almost warm in her voice. "You told me where you want it to end before you have shown me how you mean to get there." She looked at him. "I do that with books, as it happens." He looked at her for a long moment. And then, there, in the kitchen garden, in the June afternoon, in the vicarage of a country clergyman with ink-stained fingers, Eliot Ashbourne smiled. Not the polished social expression that Bath and London received. A real one. The kind that reached everything. "Then perhaps," he said, "we will be well matched." They were married in September, quietly, in the small church that was her father's, with the lavender from the kitchen garden in a jar on the window sill because she had planted it the week of their engagement, and it had come up better than expected. Her father cried. Thomas stood at the back, looking simultaneously relieved and guilty in the particular way of younger brothers who understand they caused everything. And the Duke held her hand through the whole ceremony because she had asked him to, and he had not hesitated. His valet found him at the garden window the following spring at 6:30, smiling at nothing Jennings could identify. From somewhere in the house, the morning room, the kitchen passage, one of the quiet and ordinary corridors of a life being lived, there came the sound of a melody, soft and unhurried, the kind of sound a person makes when they believe themselves entirely alone and are entirely content. Jennings opened his mouth. "That will be all," the Duke said, quietly, with the particular quality of a man who has learned the value of a thing and does not intend to disturb it. Because some things, the very best things, are not for explaining. They are only for hearing if you have learned at last how to listen. And if this story stayed with you, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. Kindly support the channel by subscribing. It helps us grow. You can also share the story with someone who might enjoy it too. Finally, we'll love to know your rating of the story on a scale of 1 to 10. These ratings help us make better stories. Thank you, and we love you.